I'm sorry, I need you to repeat that, a hologram of a hooded figure said, moving the hood to the side as they stared up at the four-armed weasel like the Ran pirate. I could have sworn you said you raided a human orphanage at the edge of their system and took the young ones as hostages, the figure continued with an odd calmness in their voice. Yep, got a bunch of good ones too, the pirate replied, grinning. Couple of actual human young along with a few Voran kids, they'll fetch a good price. Put them back, for the love of the fabric of reality, put them the F back before whoever runs that orphanage comes for all of us, the figure interrupted, their tone no longer calm but panicked. They jabbed a finger at the captain, causing the surrounding crew members to glance at each other in confusion. Only the first mate, who was in the brig at the back of the bridge for vehemently disagreeing with such actions, shook his head from underneath a pile of children sleeping on his body. Already too late, lads, I warned you, but you didn't want to listen, the hammer-headed alien sighed, settling back. He winced as a few bruises twinged from the little ones rubbing against him. And now you'll be reaping your deserts, he said as alarms screeched, waking the children. Many of the Voran heads popped up in alarm. Little ones, just your caretakers coming to get you back, the shark-like pirate said, rubbing the Voran heads, making them chirp lowly and settle down again, chattering softly. Captain, ship to our AR, a sensor officer spoke, catching everyone's attention. The hammerhead squinted at the image of an aging former cargo vessel burning toward them with a vengeance. She was beaten and battered, clearly having been put lovingly back together over decades. Designed like an old seafaring container ship, her cargo containers had been replaced with turrets flanking a massive cannon aimed directly at them. Her hull sprouted more turrets fore and aft, with broadside cannons between them, while the eerie glow of her engines pushed her forward in a steady pursuit. Sir, we are out of turret range but can't do anything about her main cannon, one officer said, eyeing the cannon dubiously. Not like they'll fire on us anyway, we've got hostages, don't we? They smirked, but it faded as the first mate shook his head among the little ones. One of the children poked their head up and giggled. Brat Fleur, they giggled, making one of the other officers freeze and turn slowly. The officer, a Kurar who had agreed to this act for revenge, now sported a pale complexion, their massive cycloptic eyes iris shrunk to a pinprick. The Fleur, they said slowly before spinning around, hands flying across the console. Sir, massive energy spike in the vessel's output, engines increasing heat output. They're actually going to fire. The officer's report went silent as the screen showed the worn vessel rock as the main cannon fired. A pointed shell rocketed toward them at near light speed. Helm, adjust course, it's a low-speed Mach, just let it pass, dumb humans, the captain smirked as the ship shuddered, RCS engines strafing them up. Then they saw fire erupt from the shell, zipping toward them and realigning to still hit. It was closing rapidly. Sir, transmission from the ship, one of the Vox officers called out as a screen flickered, revealing a brute of a man squished into a chair with a crash harness over his armor, rolling a cigar between his lips with a frown of disdain. A bandana kept his hair neat, and a thick beard with faint white stripes adorned his face. His thick, bushy eyebrows bent down in a scowl. After taking a draw from the cigar, the human pulled it from his mouth and spoke. This is Captain Brutus of the Fleur de Cadavre. You've got 10 seconds to hand over my nieces and nephews before my brother and I come in there and give the lot of you a pummeling, came the deep bear-like voice of the man. He flicked the ash forming on the end of his cigar into a tray on the arm. FCK, the hologram near the pirate captain whispered, staring at the same screen the captain was. What's a human pirate got with a bunch of cast-offs and nobodies? The Therian growled, narrowing his eyes at the brute of a human staring back. The room the man sat in seemed to shake, lights flickering nearby. The helmsman on the Ran pirate ship cursed viciously and pulled hard on the controls, the ship's artificial gravity systems fighting to keep the rapid velocity change from affecting the organic occupants. That bunch of cast-offs and nobodies you called them, the brute said as a slow grin spread across his face, revealing a metal tooth. They happen to be my brother's adopted family, making them my family. I may not agree with my straight-laced brother on much, but one thing we both agree on is you don't touch our family, stone brain, so you'd best be ready to hand them back unharmed. The transmission cut out just as the sensor operator yelled, brace for impact. The entire ship shook, waking up the other kids, while the ones who had been awake giggled playfully. Several pirates surrounded the spike-like projectile that had punched a hole in their ship, splitting the deck apart. The back half, just before the engine, had a flange and had sealed the air in. What worries me most, though, is the hatch on the side opened up, showing signs of literally being forced through the deck that should have by rights kept it shut. Criffing what is in this thing? One said as they inched closer to the ruined marks on the floor. No clue, another said as they slowly walked closer to the thing and peeked inside. Huh, they mumbled. Only one crash harness is up, all the others are still down. Wait, the pilot's one is up too. You don't say, a deep voice said behind them, right before a massive metal-covered fist appeared where their head had been, embedding the pirate's body in the opposite wall. Now the real fun begins, the towering human smirked, rolling his shoulders as he calmly lit a fresh cigar he pulled from a pouch on his armor. Ain't that right? He asked a smaller figure who was lighting their own corn cob pipe and gave a grin up at the other. Yep, let's go and say hello, said a lighter, more bubbly voice, though it had a raspy edge to it like someone used to belting out orders and having them followed to the dot. Oh, one tough gas, which hates all pukas, what ain't beyond the up in the square. An eerie jovial shanty rang out through the corridor, much to the huddling pirate's horror, the words distorted either by a speech impediment or likely the corn cob pipe in the singer's mouth. Son of a sing thou, we should have never gone to that station. Just what in the 7 rings of torment did the captain piss off this time? One pirate whispered, poking their head out of the corridor. A light down the hall suddenly had a silhouette of a human wearing an officer's cap and a pipe pass through it, forcing them to duck back down into the cupboard. So biffs and I buffs them, and always outroughs them, the voice continued before trailing off quieter down the hall, making the pirate sigh with relief. Thank the void he didn't turn down the hall. There's no way he wouldn't have found her, another pirate whispered softly, leaning against the wall. But none of them gets nowhere. Twin fists punched through the bulkhead beside them, ripping a hole through the wall, right as a wiry form grabbed the pirate leaning against the wall and snapped them in half like a tooth. Throwing them to the side, the sound of a hissing piston was heard just before a punch was thrown, and the faint light in the cupboard showed a piston jutting out of the elbow area along the back of the bulky forearm. Slamming forward with a blow, driving the fist through his opponent's chest, the bridge was in a tizzy, officers sprinting left and right, barking orders, and getting worrying reports from the lower decks. Outside the ship, the Fleur de Cadavre kept pace like a horrific specter, her cannons tracking them closely, not letting them go. Even if the main cannon was no longer aimed at them, they were still locked in. Sir, multiple injuries on the lower decks, blunt injuries, broken bones, snapped limbs by the sounds of it, one officer called out as another ran up panting. The officer looked terrible, armor beaten and tattered, dented in various places by what looked like fists. Oddly, the armor seemed twisted around said fists. Sir, we can't stop them. Getting close is virtual suicide, they said, trying to pull themselves together as the Ran captain snarled, pulling out a small black vial and loading it into his armor. All this for a bunch of cast-offs, he snarled under his breath as multiple troopers surrounded the doorway that had just slammed shut, the sound of pneumatic locks hissing shut. Boom! A massive fist suddenly appeared in the door on one side. Boom! Another fist, similar in size but set lower and a different shape, appeared on the other side, forcing the door off its rails even as the metal tried to hold firm. Bang! The doors flew off their hinges as a duo of laughter rang out, one deep and harsh, the other lighter and more jovial though with a chaotic tone. And stepping from the shadows was the hulking form of Dread Privateer Bluto the Terrible, his trademark smirk on his face. At his side was the smaller laughing form of a wiry human, one eye blind from a deformity on one side of his face, the result of countless fistfights he had likely won. His corn cob pipe angled in the air as he grinned widely, his working eye panning about the room, locking onto each of the soldiers and pirates, noting their positions. All while he tore the lid off a can of green leafy food with his bulky hands, calmly tipping it back before swallowing and smirking. So, former Commodore Frank Poe Feigl said as the synthetic skin on his bulky lower arms separated along his wrists, his fists beginning to spin as capacitors in his arms whined loudly. "Who's the puka some pummelin' today?" he said with a vicious grin. "Who's the palooka some pummelin' today?" Frank Poe Feigl repeated, his grin widening as he scanned the room, his fists still spinning. The Ran captain, eyes wide with a mix of rage and fear, raised his weapon and aimed it at the approaching duo. "Fire!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the pressure. The room erupted into chaos, laser fire and projectiles filled the air, but Poe and Bluto moved with surprising agility for their size. Poe's spinning fists deflected shots while Bluto's hulking form absorbed others with a grunt, his armor taking the brunt of the damage. "Come on, USC wags, show 'em what we're made of!" Poe shouted, charging forward with Bluto at his side. Bluto laughed deeply, his powerful arms swinging in wide arcs, sending pirates flying with each punch. His laughter echoed through the chaos, a chilling counterpoint to the screams and shouts of the Ran crew. In the midst of the battle, Poe spotted the first mate still surrounded by the children. "Keep him safe, mate," he called out, giving the first mate a reassuring nod. "Aye, sir," the first mate replied, shielding the children as best he could from the mayhem around them. Poe and Bluto carved a path through the pirates, their combined strength and ferocity unstoppable. The Ran captain, realizing the tide had turned against him, tried to retreat but found his path blocked by Bluto. Going somewhere? Bluto growled, grabbing the captain by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The captain struggled, but Bluto's grip was like iron. Please, mercy, the captain pleaded, his eyes wide with terror. Poe approached, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the captain. Mercy? You wanted mercy when you took these kids? He asked, his voice cold. The captain stammered, unable to form a coherent response. I didn't think so, Poe said, turning to Bluto. Let's make sure he understands not to mess with our family. Bluto nodded, tossing the captain aside like a rag doll. The captain hit the wall with a thud, groaning in pain. Poe and Bluto turned their attention to the remaining pirates, who were quickly losing their will to fight. Drop your weapons and you might get out of this alive. Poe shouted, his voice booming over the sounds of battle. One by one, the pirates complied, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. The bridge fell silent, the only sounds the groans of the injured and the soft whimpering of the frightened children. Poe and Bluto surveyed the scene, their expressions grim. All right, gather up the kids and let's get em out of here, Poe ordered, turning to the first mate. You've done good, lad. The first mate nodded, relief flooding his features as he began to organize the children. Bluto, meanwhile, kept a watchful eye on the surrendering pirates, his imposing presence enough to keep them in line. Captain Brutus, Poe called out, opening a channel to the Fleur de Cadavre. We've got the kids and the ship secure. The screen flickered to life, showing Brutus's stern face. Good work, Poe. Bring em over and we'll get these kids back where they belong. Aye, Captain, Poe replied, nodding. He turned to the first mate. Let's move out. With the children in tow and the defeated pirates under guard, Poe, Bluto, and the first mate led their charges to the docking bay. The Fleur de Cadavre loomed outside, its presence a reassuring sight against the void of space. As they boarded the ship, Poe looked back at the Ran vessel. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can mess with our family, he muttered, shaking his head. The Fleur de Cadavre's engines roared to life and the ship pulled away from the pirate vessel, setting a course back to the orphanage. The children, now safe, clung to their rescuers, their eyes filled with gratitude. Poe and Bluto shared a nod, their mission accomplished. They had protected their family and no one would ever forget the day the Fleur de Cadavre came to their rescue.